Yep, that did it. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you guys the list of equipment and we're going to talk about that. So, okay, here we go. All right, so under Quizlet list links, have you guys been here yet to look at the lab equipment? You've got lab equipment. And this brings up a list of all of the lab equipment. So some of this is pretty familiar to you now that you've gone through a lab. Some of it, get it to show the other side. But I mean, there's a way to show, oh well, I'll just click on them. Okay, so you guys all use the scales. You're familiar now with using, and on your sheet it's called a balance. Usually we call it a scale, so probably no worries there. You're going to see these tested two different ways. I'm going to give you guys 5 of these diagrams. You're going to have to tell me what the equipment is. And then the other thing you'll have to do is I'm going to give you a list of equipment and then some activities, and you'll have to tell me what piece of equipment you would use. So you're going to want to take some video or some notes on this as you go to kind of keep track. All right, the next thing we have are beakers. Beakers are the pots and pans of the chemistry lab. The mistakes some students make is they try to measure with beakers. They'll try to actually use the scale on the beakers to measure out 100 mils. That is not going to work at all. That's for approximation purposes only. If you're trying to measure out liquid, you're going to do a different piece of equipment. In beakers, we boil, we combine, we mix, but we don't measure. And you'll notice in your lab kits, you have 1,000 mil beakers, 600 mil beakers, 400, you've got lots of different shapes and sizes, just like you have lots of different shapes and sizes of pans. So Erlenmeyer flask, we're actually going to talk about 3 pieces of equipment here. Oh, is this not going alphabetically? It must not. On your sheets, so you all have your sheets here, you have a burette clamp, you have a burette, and you have an Erlenmeyer flask. Those 3 pieces of equipment are used together in a process called titration. I will spell that for you. It is T-I-T-R-A-T-I-O-N. T-I-T-R-A-T-I-O-N, titration. So in titration, we put a liquid into this Erlenmeyer flask. The purpose for an Erlenmeyer flask is to mix. So as you're working on this, you spin the Erlenmeyer flask like this, and the substances in the flask mix. That's not right. Mix. So you have above it the burette, and the burette, if I can find it, I'm going to scroll down here. This isn't a great picture of the burette, but you'll notice it has this aperture at the bottom that's called a stopcock. So you hold the Erlenmeyer flask underneath, you swirl it, and you add liquid from this column. And you'll notice it's got very small markings, so you can get a very precise amount of liquid or a very precise volume. But the only time you're going to use this is if you're doing the process called titration. Then you also have a burette clamp. How did I do that? There we go. That holds the burette in place. So a burette clamp, a burette, and an Erlenmeyer flask are used together for titration. Does that make sense? Do you guys have any questions on that? Okay. Go back to our list. Evaporating dish. How do I get here? So in lab, I noticed some of the people evaporated their liquid off in their beakers. You actually should have evaporated off in your evaporating dish. It's made for that. It's a little bit tougher, It's ceramic versus glass, and it handles heat better. Now I found out you guys heat it over Bunsen burners. I always do this lab on hot plates. I think it works better, but you guys have had some Bunsen burner experience, so that's good. That's okay. But if you're going to drive liquid off, you would want to use an evaporating dish. Funnels, kind of explanatory. You've used those before, and a lot of you filtered your substance through funnel and filter paper. So our funnels are designed to hold filter paper to let us filter things in a lab. Some of these things we really don't need to talk about all that much. So the filter paper goes in the funnel. Okay, graduated cylinder. You'll notice here I have a 10, a 25, and a 100. Graduated cylinders are used for measuring out liquid again, but it's important what graduated cylinder you pick. If I want to measure 20 mils, do I want to use the 100 mil or do I want to use the 25? What do you guys think? The 25. You want to use the graduated cylinder that's the closest to the volume you want to measure. Your hashes, your gradations will be spread out further. You'll get a more accurate reading. So always pick the graduated cylinder that's closer to the volume you're trying to measure. Spatula, on one end it's usually pointed, the other end's flat. We can use that to scrape away substances inside of beakers. Chemical scoop. It's like a little bit of if you've ever taken a piece of paper and kind of bent it so you can pour stuff. That's what the chemical scoop does. We use it for powders. So if you're in a chemistry lab where you have powders, and you'll use a chemical scoop. Stir rod lets us stir stuff. Easy peasy. Okay, ring stand's kind of one of our workhorses. We use ring stands to hook lots of different things to it. The most common thing that we put on a ring stand is an iron ring, and it's got a clamp on one end and it's got a ring on the other. On top of that iron ring, we can put things. So you guys put wire gauze on top of your iron rings, and you could set stuff then on top of that. The other thing that you can set on top of an iron ring is clay triangle. There we go. So that guy's called a clay triangle. The wires go on top of the iron ring, and then the triangle part is ceramic. And we use this to hold crucibles. So the only purpose for a clay triangle is to hold a crucible in place. Crucibles here are small, and they're used to heat something up to a really, really high temperature. So we burn magnesium in one of our labs. We do that in a crucible. We've got to get that thing heated up. In fact, it's glowing red. Why wouldn't we just set that on the wire gauze? It's really tippy. You really want to tip over something that's glowing hot, glowing red hot onto your toes or your hand, or no, you don't. That would not be a good thing. So clay triangles and crucibles go together. All right, let me pause. Are there questions so far? Everything makes sense? Even though I'm not holding up, I usually hold up the equipment. I thought this will be easier because I can record it and grade group can watch it. All right, there's our iron rings. We just talked about those. You guys have used those before. Wire gauze. Sometimes it's got a white circle in the center. That's a heat resistant or a heat conductive substance. Sometimes it's just the gauze. There's nothing in the center. Test tubes. Test tubes are pretty, you guys all know what those are. They're pretty self-explanatory, but we'll have lots of labs where you might have 4 or 5 liquids, and we'll put the test tubes in test tube racks, and that'll let you work with multiple liquids in one lab. There's our racks. A test tube clamp is specially designed to hold test tubes. So you pinch it and it opens, and that's going to work better for picking up a test tube than any other piece of equipment you have in your chem kit. So if you contrast test tube clamps with crucible tongs, these guys are a lot bigger. They're going to be for picking up bigger things. And in the center, we have this little gap where a crucible can fit. So that's why they're called crucible tongs, but these are more heavy duty. For example, you could use crucible tongs to pick up a beaker, but you could never use a test tube clamp to pick up a beaker. Watch glass is set over top of a beaker. It's like a lid for a pot. So a watch glass covers a beaker. It's a beaker cover or a beaker lid, basically. A mortar and pestle, this is used to grind dry substances. So you would put substances into this that are solid. So for example, my cat has medicine that's in pills and I need it in a powder because I mix it in with her milk. And so I have a mortar and pestle at home. I'll throw the pills in there and I'll grind them up into a powder. We use this in biology when we did chromatography. We ground up spinach leaves in our mortars and pestles. So we grind solids here. Bunsen burner, flame comes out here, gas connections here, and you've used these in lab. All right, now we have a pipette and a pipette bulb. If I had to measure out 1 or 2 mils of a liquid, I'm going to use a pipette with a bulb. So the bulb is on the end and we use that to suck the liquid into the pipette. But this lets us get very accurate, precise liquid volumes. And you can see here, so I have 19, I could do 19.1, 19.2, 19.3. So if you're measuring a small amount, you're going to use a pipette. Yes, ma'am. Oh, you were just stretching on your poor hand. Okay. And next to that, we probably have, oh, disposable pipette. You guys will use these a lot. They're the little plastic, poor man's version of a pipette. And if we need to add a couple of drops, we'll use these. We'll throw them away when we're done. Questions so far? Is some of this new? A little bit, not much. Here's that pipette bulb. And we're going to do a whole lab. We're going to teach you how to pipette. We're going to do a whole lab. We're going to teach you how to titrate. There's our burette we talked about, our burette clamp we talked about. There's our crucible that we talked about. Weigh dish, these are disposable. Never, ever, ever use a weigh dish. If you take it and you use it, throw it away when you're done. And there's our clay triangle. Okay, so again, you'll get 5, 6 of these pictures. You'll have to tell me what they are. I'll give you a list of equipment and then 5 or 6 activities. You'll have to tell me which one you would pick for the test next week. I'm going to stop sharing. So if you're watching from home, I hope this was helpful and we'll see you soon.